First of all, thanks for everyone coming to the Hockey Hall of Fame tonight for this wonderful evening. 40 years ago, a remarkable thing happened for hockey, for Canadian hockey, and certainly Canadian history. Tonight's going to be a wonderful night, hearing great stories from people that you know, about stories about this great 72 series that hopefully you haven't heard before. My name is Sean Mitten, and in my way, this book was inspired by the goal that united Canada. And 3 or 4 years ago, I had spoken to Paul Henderson in different interviews, and we had spoke about how people come up to him all the time and share where they were back in 1972. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to have stories from people all across Canada and to share with future generations, and we could put a book out. And that process happened over the last year and a half. I've collected well over 220 stories from people or celebrities that you may know, like a Don Cherry or Walter Gretzky, from people who were in Moscow for the series, which was amazing. And we have representation from each province. So it really is truly a Canadian book. It's a hockey book. It's a Canadian pride book. And so tonight, I hope to entertain you with some of the stories that come from the book and outside of the book. And I think you really find them fascinating. So before I go further, I just want to mention after the session, if you do have a question, we'll try to fit it in. Otherwise, at 9:30, we're going to go downstairs to the theater, and we're going to watch third period of the 8th and final game. What better way to do it at the Hockey Hall of Fame on the 40th anniversary? So I hope you have a great evening. At this time, I'd like to now introduce our speakers on the panel. And the format for tonight is we'll kind of go through the beginning of the series all the way to Game 8 with the objective of really educating you the different perspectives that happened all the way through. Hopefully years later, when you think about the Paul Henderson goal, it won't be just about that moment when Yvonne Cornway is hugging him. It'll be about stories from people like Bob Cole, like Brian McFarland and Jim Herter and Scott Wraithby, Steve Dowling, and it'll be a great memories that you can pass on with other generations. And certainly the book has a lot of those stories as well. So without further ado, let's introduce some of the folks on our panel. First of all, I'd like to introduce Bob Cole. Bob, we've known for years through Hockey Night in Canada, and a lot of people forget that he was the voice on CBC Radio for Game 8 and the rest of the series. Bob, come on up today. Next, I'd like to introduce Brian McFarland, also of Hockey Night in Canada fame, and an author of many books, including the 30th anniversary of the 72 Summit Series. Brian, thanks for joining us tonight. Next, I'd like to introduce Steve Dowling. You get a Canada-Russia series going, you need to have an unbiased referee. We have U.S.-born ref Steve Dowling. Steve, thanks for being with us. In going through the book, I talked to a number of people who were in Moscow, and it just amazed me that 3,000 Canadians would, spend a lot of money, go to a Cold War country and watch 4 games of hockey, and of course some ballet too. And this gentleman was one of those people. Jim Herter, please join us. And finally, I'd like to introduce Scott Wraithby. Scott has a very unique set of stories. He personally didn't go to the games in Moscow, but his parents did, and they came home with a souvenir item that most Canadian kids would drool over. Scott Wraithby, come on out. So, gentlemen, we'll set the stage a little bit about the beginning of the series, and some people remember that. We thought it was going to be an easy going, and first I'll start off with you, Bob. You had some interesting conversations about your relationship with the Russians and how things went for communications early on.
I did, as a matter of fact. When I was told that I had been selected to do the radio for CBC, naturally I was delighted, and I made sure that I got to Montreal, where the team from the Soviet Union would arrive. The series, as you all know, started on a Saturday, so I went up on Wednesday. And the team flew in Wednesday night, and I was at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel to greet the 2 buses that had all these players. Everybody knew that it was a mystery, this hockey team, and how good they were, and how tough they were going to be, and what kind of a team it was going to be. But I think everybody felt that this is just going to be a nice exhibition series, and our NHLers would take care of them without any problem. But anyway, my job was to learn how to say all these strange names. So that's why I went to Montreal early. And I did meet the team. Now, I have to point out that Mr. Ozerov was the broadcaster in the Soviet Union for hockey. And as far as I know at the time, he was the only one. And he was held in really high esteem. Brian, you'd get a kick out of this. A little different here in North America, but over there he was God. So I then, because I was there to meet the team as they arrived off the bus in Montreal, and it became known that I was going to be one of the broadcasters for Canada, they thought that I was the type that Ozerov was in the Soviet Union, so I got some special treatment. And I was introduced to their official interpreter. His first name is Victor. I can't recall his second name, but he studied English at Oxford University, and so therefore, you know, he had perfect English. So I hit it pretty lucky the first meeting, and we got together, had breakfast the next day, and he went through every player for me, and I wrote them all phonetically and studied them. And a couple of days later, we met again, and he said, "Okay, you're ready to go, Bob." It was pretty good. But I'll get to it a little later and cut this short, not to go too long with this, because it's not all that interesting, I'm sure, to you, but it was to me. But when I got to Moscow, I was told later that I was the only media person allowed in the Soviet dressing room, and I got in before every game. Now, Foster Hewitt, who was doing television and was my hero growing up, looking down the road, maybe someday wanting to do a job like that, I got some great help from Foster Hewitt, and it was wonderful that when I got over to Moscow for the last 4 games, that Foster Hewitt actually came looking for me before every game. Somebody tell me where Bob is, I've got to find him, and I would help Foster with the names and the lineup. So I had a chance. It took me a long time to thank him, and I was very happy about that.
That's great. Brian, tell us a little bit about your role at that time, and we talked earlier about a bet with a colleague about how they thought Canada was going to dominate.
Well, I was hired by Hockey Canada. Excuse my voice, folks. I moved into a new condo, and the air in there is awful. So the last month has been just terrible. But Hockey Canada, after Hockey Night in Canada, lost the TV rights, which really annoyed a lot of us who'd been there a while. They just didn't want to pay enough money for them. They didn't think that series would amount to very much, I guess. Hockey Canada hired me as a liaison person between the Eagleson Group and Hockey Canada Group. So I gave up my vacation, drove 200 miles back for the press conference, and was totally ignored by Eagleson's group. He just had all his fellows up there. And I said, I guess I'm like a fish out of water here. But I did go for the 4 games in Canada. Then I realized I wasn't being used very much, and I was taking money and tickets to Moscow that I didn't think I'd earned, so I turned them in and bowed out and went home, and I often regretted doing that. My wife regretted it even more. But the first game, I remember the practice, the skate in the morning before the first game, sitting up the stands, and Bobby Orr came up and sat with us. And he watched the Russian team practicing and warming up, and we call it the skates in the morning of the game. And Bobby said, "Look at those guys. Look at how they're shooting at their goaltender. They're moving right in 15 feet in front and letting a slap shot. Our guys would kill us if we did that." So I felt that Bobby was really scoffing at their warm-up tactics. And then the game that night, I remember Mr. Trudeau coming out to drop the puck, and somehow I was in a front rail seat next to Jocelyn Barassa, that name probably doesn't ring a bell with many of you, but she was one of the best, probably the best female golfer in Canada at the time. And with her was an American professional golfer, a lady who was seeing her very first hockey game. And throughout the match, Jocelyn was saying, now that's an offside, and they put the puck up here, and the woman was looking totally nonplussed. And I'm thinking, here she is, one of the start of a great series, and she really is taking a seat that a real hockey fan would have loved to have had. So that was the start of it. And was there anything else, Sean?
No, that was great.
Okay.
That's great.
Thank you.
Steve had such a great story that we created a section in the book called Overtime because we had so many Canadian stories. And I really enjoyed Steve's story. In fact, we called it the arranged marriage. And tell us a little bit about the philosophy behind that.
Well, you know, as an American, and all the officials that refereed the games in Canada as part of the arrangement were designated to come from the United States, and all the officials in Russia would come from Europe. So a little bit of the series was foreign, literally and even figuratively. So we went to the first game and read all the papers, listened to all the interviews as to how this is going to be a series, and read an article by Punch Imlach that warned the Canadians, don't take us seriously, this is not a big deal, and approached the first game watching it, and at the very end of it, stood in the forum when no one moved for 5 minutes after the game, and because the Canadians lost. And it was, you know, awe-inspiring. But then to have to referee the next game and watch the lineup change, where Cashman comes into the lineup, Makita comes into the lineup, Parisi comes into the lineup, you know, it's saying there's something different here. And it just dawned on me that here you have a marriage that was orchestrated for enterprise. I believe that the orchestrators were in it to show that Canada was the best and the Russians, you know, were sitting on the top of the heap. But it was like an arranged marriage of two organizations, two people that really didn't know each other, and they met for the very first time in Montreal. And of course, after the second game in Toronto, the marriage was culminated. And it wasn't a very pleasant marriage. The future didn't look all that solid.
That's great. Jim, tell us a little bit about the thought process of getting this ticket package to Moscow, and how early did that happen, and what was your experience?
Well, it was in late August that I heard about the trip to Moscow, and 2 or 3 of my pals were going on Air Canada, and by the time I got permission from home, it was it was a few days later. And I was put on Aeroflot, and so the advertisement said, first class all the way, and great meals on the plane and everything, and coal, and those guys all got wonderful meals on Air Canada. On Aeroflot, it wasn't first class, and it was supposed to be free bar all the way. It was half a bottle of vodka, no ice, no water, no glass. Have a good day. When we got to Moscow, I was from St. John's at the time, so we flew up to Montreal and had a great time there for a few days before we left. And when we got to Moscow, we were tired. It was 17 hours. We had a layover in Paris, and then we ran into reality. The customs people held us up for 2 hours. They went through every single bag, every single person on the plane, and everything was niet, and they were in your face, and we just sort of were amazed. It wasn't like you were flying to Halifax with your hockey team. It was reality. And so we'll talk a little bit more later about the rest.
Sure. Scott, you had a different scenario. In fact, your dad came home and had a message for your family. Tell us a little bit about that and your family, how many kids and stuff you had at that time.
Sure. First of all, it's a great honor to be sitting here with with these gentlemen, and having spent the night last night with most of them. But back to your question, I was 11 years old at the time when all this was taking place, and my mom and dad decided, I think Dad decided, pack your bags, we're leaving, and oh yeah, by the way, we're going to Russia. So when they came home, I remember there was a big welcome sign that Dad was actually, during one of the intermissions in Russia, Dad was behind Foster Hewitt, waving like the kids do now behind the camera, and he's waving, and so the neighbors all got together in our subdivision and took a big 4x8 piece of plywood and painted it up, and welcome home TV star, and whatnot. And then we sat down at the dinner table, probably for a Sunday dinner, and out came all the little trinkets. There was pins and everything they brought back, and then, oh, by the way, we happened to bring back a couple hockey sticks too.
Great.
It was very nice.
Excellent. We'll jump over to Steve for a sec. We're moving into Game 2. You ref Game 2 in Toronto, and you had a very interesting experience, and then afterwards with Scotty Morrison. Maybe you could take us through that and how it affected your reffing career.
Well, it was really quite an honor to be selected to participate in that series, and you know, like the teams, the officials are diminishing. The other three Americans are now, you know, passed on, and I feel kind of a little bit lonely, you know, here, you know, doing this. But at the same time, the second game in Canada was the only one won by the Canadians. And of course, it had highlights in it and lowlights, depending on which team you were at. I look over here, and on the third row down, the second from the end, is a guy named Scotty Morrison, Ian Scotty Morrison, which reminds me of a situation in the end of the second period where there was a penalty to a Russian, and it was a slashing or a high stick. And Kharlamov, by this time in the game, this is the first that they've experienced the North American style of play, which wasn't present in the first game. It's rough, it's physical, it's physicality, and the Russians have been used to the Olympic-style gentlemanly play. And it wasn't atypical of an intense North American game, but for the Russians, it was. So it incited with their leader, Kharlamov, after the penalty at the end of the period, that he came over and attempted to, you know, get my attention and vent his frustration, and he bumped me. And the only call for that is a misconduct. I look over my shoulder by the blue line, and there's Scotty Morrison, the referee-in-chief for the NHL, and he's got it, the Canadian flag must have been this big on his chest, saying, just yelling at me, "That's a game misconduct, game misconduct." And I thought to myself, I think it's a misconduct, I'm going to go with it. So I stuck with the misconduct. Later that evening, I received a call in my room from Mr. Morrison's office that he wanted to see me at 10 o'clock the next morning in his office in Rexdale. Well, unbeknownst to the Russians, that I was about to sign a contract with the National Hockey League as the first American referee since 1949 to be a referee in the National Hockey League. And I thought to myself when I got that message, well, there goes that career. That career is absolutely done. I showed up at Mr. Morrison's office, sat in front of what appeared to be a big desk. His desk was as big as this room, but the way it appeared, and thought, okay, this is the end of it. He said, "Steve, I'm tearing your contract up." Okay, well, I knew it. He said, "But I got a new one here. It's got a couple more bucks in it, and the reason that it has a couple more dollars in it is that last night you probably saw that Canadian flag on my chest and my forehead so big. I was acting like a Canadian fan. The right call was a misconduct, and I'm going to compensate you for that." And it was only this much of a raise. It wasn't that much of a raise. So, and you know, after that, that's probably one of the reasons that Scotty Morrison and everything he did is in the Hockey Hall of Fame. And I just want to acknowledge one time, we get Brian Lewis back there. There's always a supervisor, no matter where you go. Brian Lewis from the National Hockey League, former official.
That's a great story. You know, heading into the final game and Canada lost in Vancouver, then there was certainly the booing, and Phil Esposito made that memorable speech. And I just wonder, Bob, did you feel like maybe might have been a turning point, or I just wonder what your thought might have been about how the team reacted?
Yeah, well, in hindsight, it turns out it was a turning point. You know, as we said in the beginning, when this series started, it was purely an exhibition series, as was just pointed out, and everybody figured that that's what it was going to be, a quiet international series won by Canada handily, and we had lots of players to substitute and so on, and everybody was going to play, and they quickly found out they weren't in shape, and lost the first game, won the second, and tied that game in Winnipeg, and had a shot at the Vancouver game and lost it, and the fans showed their displeasure. You can't blame them. They were there to root for their team, and they were being outclassed at every turn. So I guess Phil just kind of vented his frustrations, and I think he was just trying to tell everybody, look, we're trying awfully hard, and we're going to get better. But we didn't appreciate what we heard tonight, and again, history dictates that he was right. They got together in Sweden in the 2 exhibition games, and they pulled it off.
Yeah. Brian, what about you? Did you have any thoughts heading to Russia, whether the guys would be able to come back and finding the right chemistry, because they did play different types of teams?
I think, like a lot of people, I was upset that Team Canada wasn't in good shape to begin the series. They took it rather casually. They got in shape, and Phil's speech was certainly a turning point. I wanted to say a word about Paul Henderson. I may have to leave a little early, folks, because I'm honored that I have to go, if my voice holds out, over to the Royal York and present Paul Henderson with a plaque tonight, as it's the Heritage Award from the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame for one memorable deed. The previous winner, only one, was Terry Fox. Wow. But Paul Henderson, every week or so, should he be in the Hockey Hall of Fame? And at first I didn't think he should be many years ago, but lately I've been thinking, what an astonishing feat that was, and it'll be remembered as long as we all live. And when I look up some of the players that are in the Hockey Hall of Fame, I'll cite 2. Shorty Green was a friend of my dad up in Halebury. He took me for a ride in his new Roadster when he came home from a training camp one year, and I was about 4 years old. He's in the Hall of Fame. He played 4 or 5 years in the NHL and scored 54 points as a forward. Duke Keats, another forward, played 4 or 5 years in the NHL and had one 30-goal season. And neither of those players ever played in a Stanley Cup winner or won any awards. And I'm thinking, well, sure, it was decades ago, but those 2 fellows are in and Paul Henderson's not. So I would vote for him as being a member of the Hockey Hall of Fame if I had a vote today, which I don't. And I'll end here, but I had one more story, but I don't want to take all your time, and I'd like to hear from the other fellows.
Excellent. This question's for Jim. So now let's just say you're in Moscow, and certainly there's a culture shock. People talk about lineups. I wonder what your first experiences were in Game 5 and Game 6 of just getting a feel for what hockey was like to watch in Moscow.
Well, Game 5 was was unbelievable because we were picked up in buses, and there were 3,000 of us over there. I'm just the spokesman for one of the 3,000, and we were all pretty wrapped in the flag and cheering on the buses and so on. And as we entered the Luzhniki Ice Palace grounds, we were all chanting, "Da da Canada, Nyet Nyet Soviet," and kind of looked out the windows of the buses, and we saw the soldiers lined up from the gate, shoulder to shoulder, and this went for a mile. And the bus just got quieter and quieter and quieter until we got off the bus. And well, what are we into here? Now I found out later that they were there because Brezhnev was was in the box that night, and I ran into, when my wife and I were in France in 2006, I ran into a British man who told me that he was a spy, and he was in the box with Brezhnev that night. So it was an interesting story. But when we got into our seats, of course, the seats were bench seats, and they had numbers along the bench. And there was a policeman or a military person in the end of every row. So if we get to a row like that, if you happen to have seat number 20, there's a military guy sitting in the seat. So Canadians being Canadians, we waited till we had everybody in the row, and then we just pushed like this till we pushed them off the end. Then shortly thereafter, somebody started blowing a bugle and revving up the crowd, and the police again come into the row and try and get the bugle from him, and the guy just handed it back, and we handed it around, and you know, so we started to become a team. We really did. We were total strangers walking into the rink, and then we realized it's us 3,000 against the other 12,000 here, and we're not taking any guff.
Did you feel like the geography of the people of those 3,000 were all from across Canada? Or were they more central related? Just wondered.
No, they were from cities and towns all across Canada. On our plane, there was a whole lot of people from Montreal, New Brunswick. I've got a lot of their signatures at home. And yeah, when we took off, we didn't know anybody, and by the time we got there, we were friends.
Excellent. Just curious, in the audience, did anybody go to Moscow, or a family that went to Moscow? Just to show of hands. Yeah, there's a few. Yeah, that's great. Bob, for you, you know, on the media side, going in and reffing, you told the story about Game 5, how as an interesting scenario was different than the Forum in Montreal or the Gardens. Tell us a little bit about that, and also the ride, the elevator with Henderson after one of the games.
Oh, well, there was one story about Paul that I haven't told too many times. When we left that skate, as Brian called it, and we all call it the skate, the day of the first game in Montreal at the Forum, I was leaving to go back to the hotel on Atwater Street, and I was about to cross the street to get a cab, where the cabs park over there, and I heard my name called, and there was a cab over there and guys in it, so then I heard it again. Bob, we're going back to the hotel. Do you want a lift? So then I recognized it was our guy, so I went over and got in the cab. I got in the back with Ron Ellis and Bobby Clark, and Paul was in the front with the taxi driver. So we're going along St. Catherine Street on the way back, and I said to the guys, okay, fellas, you've seen them practice, and you've seen Tretiak, and you've seen the backup goalie, and what do you think about tonight? And ironically, it was Paul who spoke up and said in that clear voice of his, very confident too, he said, it's going to be 7-3. And nobody said anything, everybody agreed, I guess. And we all know it turned out to be 7-3. So that was Paul's introduction to the Soviets. And then, as you referred to, in Moscow, at the hotel, we stayed at the Interest Hotel where the team was. And the elevators, I think probably by design, Jim, everything was slowed down to their pace. You had to wait, seemed like forever for the elevator to arrive. And Paul and I were together, for whatever reason, after that, the sixth game, where Paul got the winning goal last night. And we're waiting for the elevator. And small talk was going on, and looking at the numbers, wondering if the elevator would ever arrive. Finally, I said to Paul something like, Paul, you ever think you'd get a goal so big as that one last night? And he didn't blink, kept looking at the numbers and said, you know what? I don't think so, but quite something, wasn't it? So the rest, again, is history, not to repeat myself, but he got the winning goal again in Game 7. It was a dandy. He beat everybody on the ice to get that goal. And then, of course, in the last minute, got the winner. So that was kind of neat.
Just to follow up on the elevator,
Please do.
I've got a close friend in Aurora who went with his wife and his friend and the friend's wife, and they were waiting for the elevator, and my friend's wife didn't know anything about hockey. And so they got in the elevator, and another couple joined them. And so they were talking about where your seats are, where they're, where you're going to sit tonight. And my friend's wife looked at the last guy who got in the elevator, and she said to him, "Where are your seats tonight?" And he said, "I'm playing goal." It was Dryden.
Those are pretty good seats. That's a great one. Now, Scott, for you, you're watching the series as a kid. You know your parents are there. I don't know if you got any communication from them, but what was it like for you knowing that they were there and you were watching these games?
I'm sorry, what was it like for me?
What was it like for you to watch
The
them?
only communication I had was seeing my dad behind Foster Bureau going. No, we never received word from Moscow that all was well or what they were doing. But I do remember both my brother and I saying, geez, we got out a map. These guys are half a mile or a half a world away. They're on the other side of the world, and we're able to see them. I remember that Mrs. Carroll was my school teacher, and she got the map out. This is where they are. Do you realize how far they are? And it was very surreal then, as it is now, to be sitting up here.
Yeah. Jim, you talked about, in the story about the third period of the final game, moving forward a little bit, and really how the whole Canadian contingent really came together. And I love the story that you told in that, and I'll maybe let you talk about the beginning of third period, that hopefully a great story that people haven't heard before.
Well, we were down 5-3 at the end of the second, and Bob may correct me, but I think there was a late goal that made it 5-3 near the end of the second period. And the air kind of got sucked out of the rink, and some people were despondent, and other people just felt, boy, we're running out of steam. And some guy up behind me yelled, "Next goal wins." And if you think about a hockey game as 5-3, if it becomes 5-4, then, look out. Anything can happen. If it goes to 6-3, we're toast. So we started chanting when the team came back on the ice. Next goal wins, and we're pounding the glass and everything. And 10 years ago tonight, on the 30th anniversary, there was a reunion again like there is tonight in the Royal York Hotel. And I was down there representing my school at a Sir Edmund Hillary dinner, and I had a couple of young teachers with me, and with us, I should say, my wife and I. And we walked past, coming in from the parking garage, we walked past the reception that the Team Canada 72 was having. And when the young teacher said to me, he said, "I would give my left arm to meet Phil Esposito." And I said, "You don't have to give your left arm to meet Phil Esposito. Come with me, I'll introduce you." He said, "You're kidding." So we walked in as if we owned the place. And I stood respectfully beside Phil, and when he shakes your hand, his hand is up here somewhere. And I said, last time I shook your hand, Phil, was in the Intourist Hotel. And he said, you were one of the 3,000. You guys, you were great, and he went on and on. And I said, "Did you hear us chant, 'Next goal wins'?" "You're goddamn right I did," he said.
So you guys helped will them to win, is that right?
Well, we did our best. We knew that, there was only us. There was no, as your parents found out, there was no TV, there was no radio, there was no newspapers.
Yeah.
We had no communication. We might as well have been on the moon. And the only way we could help was get behind them.
Yeah. One of the other stories that I wanted to share, and a gentleman who wanted to be here tonight, Denny Brodeur. And you may know Denny Brodeur also as the father of Martin Brodeur, the great goalie for the New Jersey. And his story to me occurred at that 5-3 mark in the game. And Denny did a lot of work for the Montreal, different type of Montreal contracts. And for him, one of them was a book. And so one of the shots that he hadn't got in the series was the picture of the Russian coach. So where he was stationed on the ice next to Frank Lennon, he had to go around the rink. So he hopped over to get his picture, and of course, Team Canada scores to make it 5-4, and then it becomes 5-5, and he's got to hustle back to get a good shot for the end of the game. So throughout the series, he had bribed the Russian army security guy right by his location by giving him candy. And this security guard kept his spot and allowed him to get back in. And Denny was one of the two individuals who got the famous Paul Henderson goal with his arms raised. And most people, know that Frank Lennon, the Toronto Star photographer, is the guy who won the Canadian Press Award for that year and won other photo awards. But Denny Brodeur also took that shot, and he was roughly one frame apart, and they were literally beside each other. And in the book, there's a great picture of them to really get a sense of how close they were. So Denny's had some health issues lately, and hopefully all our thoughts are good for him. But just a wonderful story and a great idea on third period.
Just another aside on that story.
Yeah.
A roll of film in those days had 36 exposures on it, if you're a photographer.
Yeah.
And that shot he took was number 38 on the roll. So it was right at the end, and it was just pure luck.
And speaking of film, my mom and dad took over a Polaroid. Pull it out and it lifts up. And the people over there were just in awe. So take their picture, and in a minute they're looking at themselves. It was just. So when Jim was down and when you were down, Sean, in Halifax, we got the book open, and here's all these Polaroid shots. That just came to me.
That's what I enjoyed about getting stories in this book. You hear words like Polaroids and transistor radios and teletypes. It's like, what are these? And some, 8-track tapes, So it's amazing how things have changed over the years. Nobody tweeted the winning Henderson goal. So, but to move forward a little bit into the big moment and the big goal, and we're going to play the call soon. Bob, once it got to 5-5, did you think that it was just going to end in a tie? Did you feel like there was still a chance? I just wonder if you had any feelings back then.
No, I had no idea. And you never knew when you're working a hockey game. You can't really look ahead. You just kind of try to feel the game and what's happening. At least that's the way I approach it. And it was exciting, of course. It got more tense with every passing moment. And our guys looked very, very good, though. As Jim mentioned, 5-3 going into the third. I don't think Don Orey would mind if I told this brief story about the team and how they pulled together and became one. I mean, all these guys, Don played the first game in Montreal and didn't play another, and there were plenty of players like that, but they hung around. Eddie Johnson didn't play a game. He was the third goalie, and he was on the ice every practice, every day, and warmed up the team and stayed late and really worked hard for that team, and didn't get to play till we had the 13th game of the entire series, 2 in Sweden, and the 4 in Moscow, 4 here, and 1 in Prague, Czechoslovakia. And Harry Sinden threw him in after the partying, as you can imagine, winning the series a couple of nights ago. And Eddie went in goal. He was outstanding. And Savard, I remember, scored a goal very late in that game to earn a tie. But Eddie Johnson became one of my favorite people after that entire series. He didn't have one disparaging word, just worked hard, helped the guys, and played that last game without having played a game for a month. And he was outstanding. He was a great fellow, Eddie Johnson. Went on to great heights, of course, in Pittsburgh. Drafted Mario and the rest there. You all know Stanley Cups and stuff. But Don Orey was one of the players that didn't play over there. And the players were dressed neatly in the Canadian jackets and so on. They sat across from our booth on the other side of the rink. And I said to Don, we became friends. We walked through Red Square, saw the sights on days off and so on, and became pretty good friends. And I said, for this last game, we got a little bit of room up in the booth to my right. There's not a lot of room, but why don't you come up in the booth and watch the 8th game with me? Can't talk or yell or anything, but the mics are too close, but you can come up. And he thought that was great. So he came up. Fred Scambetti was doing the color. He was CBC Radio, sportscaster here in Toronto, and then me, and Don. So we both smoked in those days. Thank goodness those days are over. But we climbed out of the booth, and everybody in the rink was smoking, I think. You smoke, Jim? No? Okay. He was the only one. But anyway, we got out of the booth and had a cigarette between the second and third periods. And I tell you, you could cut the tension. And you'd look at Don, and he was he just couldn't carry a conversation, and nervous and uptight. And I guess I was too, with butterflies and so on, and just small talk happening. And I happened to say to Don, what do you think is going on in the room down there now? Are they quiet, or are they talking, or are they yelling, or what's going on? And he said, they're probably not talking too much right now, but I'll tell you what they are saying. And Espo has been the leader from the start. He's roaring up and down. They're all yelling, and they're saying, we've got to go hard and get a goal early. If we don't, it's over. And they did get a goal early. On we go to the rest of the period, and Paul Henderson scored that goal. Bedlam in the rink. Everybody was going crazy from Canada. All the players were on the ice, coaches. Dryden came, I remember, from one end of the rink up to the other. Everybody was up there where Paul was, having scored the goal. And finally, I had done what I'm going to do on the air, and Scambetti took it to wind it up or something. And I kind of just loosened my tie and took my glasses off and sat back. And I looked at Don to see, is he going to yell or something now or what? And he had tears coming down his face like you wouldn't believe. So, that team got awfully close. And we'll never know how close. We'll never know how close. But they kept it under wraps pretty good. And they worked hard. And, well, you saw what happened. And I'm with Brian, I mean, what am I doing in the Hockey Hall of Fame? I'm only doing a job. And there's Paul Henderson, who really lifted the country right out of their boots. And I know somebody else could have done it, but they didn't. It was Paul. And he did it 3 times. And the last one was something else. He was on the bench, and Peter was out there, a long shift for Pete. And as he went by, I understand that Paul roared, "Come on," for the change that was. And Peter climbed over, and Paul got out and wanted to get into it. And knew he had a pretty good trigger hand going the last 2 games. And sure enough, Espo digs it out and gets it over, and he had a couple of whacks at it, like Foster said, and the second one went in. I mean, why not? Why should he not be in the Hockey Hall of Fame? I think it's time. Put him in.
Mike, I think this is a good time to run the clip of Bob's call for Game 8 there.
1 minute left to go, a 5-5 tie. This is the tie-breaking game. You couldn't get it any closer. Savard at his own blue line, turning around with Pat Stapleton coming out. Stapleton's pass on an open wing, but here's Cournoyer coming up for it. A long shot in off the stick of Esposito. Vasiliev goes back of the net. Cournoyer steals it. A pass in front. Henderson was upended as he tried to shoot it. Here's another shot. Henderson right in. He scores! Henderson! While the team pours over the board,
That was great.
Henderson and Kenny Dryden. I've never seen a goaltender run that far from one end of the ice to the other, over 200 feet, all the way. Team officials are over the board. Henderson has got to be the hero of the entire nation now. 34-second clip. They got a 6-5 lead. Can they hang on? Well, I'll tell you, you wouldn't ask for anything more. Henderson, if this turns out to be the game-winning goal, will have scored the game winner in the last 3 games of the series.
That's fantastic.
I can't.
What does it feel like to hear that again?
Well, I can't imagine it's 40 years ago. Where did those 40 years go? But, yeah, it's a little goosebumpy, all right.
For sure. Jim, go ahead.
I'm going to tell a story about Bob in the ensuing party that took place in the Tourist Hotel, which was pretty wild. There was people from all over the world down there, and the bar was packed, and some of the players came down as well, and Peter Mahovlich was boasting that he was the strongest guy on Team Canada. And Cole said to him, "Come on, Peter, let's have a little arm wrestle." Peter sat down, and Cole went, boom, boom, boom. You wouldn't want to be on the wrong side.
It's called adrenaline.
Sean, I have a little story. It happened about 3 years ago. I go to Florida in the winter, and I play hockey down there against Don Orey. We don't let anybody under 65 play with us now. And I was writing a story about Harlamov, the great Russian player, and it wasn't going. I'm sitting at my computer. My wife's down at the beach with her fitness girls and the guys, and I couldn't come up with a good ending for the story. So I said, I'm going to put the computer off. I'm going down to the beach. I'm going to have a coffee with the rest of them. So I'm sitting at a bench or a table with 14 or 15 fitness people who've just finished their class. I'm sitting almost at the end of the table, and a strange woman walked up from this direction, broad-brimmed hat, very good-looking woman, maybe 45 years old, much younger than us, and she sat down next to me. And so we kind of welcomed her, but we didn't know who she was. She starts talking to the gentleman across the table, and suddenly I hear the name Harlamov. So I immediately turn and I said, "Pardon me, ma'am, did you just mention Harlamov? You're not talking about the Russian hockey player." She said, "I certainly am." I said, "Well, how in the world would you know him?" And she said, "My name is Anna Berger. I come from Moscow." And she said, he left his wife for me. Now I've got a story, don't I? I mean, I paid no attention to the rest of the people. I'm talking to her. And she told me how he left his wife and ran with Anna for 5 years, and he was such a popular hero in Moscow. She talked about night clubbing and going with him and the autograph seekers, just like they do here. And I went back and finished my story with that almost the way she told it. Never saw her again. She never showed up at the beach again, and I thought, what a small world and what a coincidence. If I'd been sitting two places over, I would never have heard the name Harlamov, and I thought that was kind of interesting. Anyway, I have to run, I'm sorry, and thank you, Sean. Good luck to you.
Brian, thanks for being here.
I know you've enjoyed the story, but I've got to go. I'll see you over there.
Thank you, Brian. Just thanks again to Brian McFarland. A couple more stories just finished tonight. Scott, you know, you have an amazing story. Your parents come home with a little gift from Moscow from you. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, yeah, I alluded to it. They brought out the pins and the vodka jars or whatever. They're not bottles like we have, that's for sure. But and then we brought home a couple of hockey sticks too, and one of them is Paul Henderson's, and the other one is Brad Parks. And according to Mom and Dad, that the Paul Henderson stick is the stick that scored the winning goal. And Dad leaned over the glass and said, "Paul, can I have your stick?" And Paul handed it up to him. And later on, there was a reception, I believe, and Paul autographed the stick, and along with the other stick from Brad Park as well. So, but you know, as an 11-year-old kid, it was like, where can we go to play? Like, Schaefer Penn was down. That's where we played all our ball hockey. But no, they were permanently mounted up in the wall.
Did you think they were real sticks? I mean,
no, actually, that's another. Because if you look at Paul's signature and compare it to signatures today, it's a very distinct signature. You can read Paul Henderson, unlike some of the hand scratching today. And I'm one of them. I hand scratch. But so I often thought growing up that oh yeah, this is a stick that they bought, and my mom signed it. And it wasn't until after my mom passed away a few years ago that I actually researched it and saw it on Google, and yeah, that's Paul Henderson's stick. And then we had moved all my family stuff into a storage unit, and I was driving down the road, and I said, Jim and Sean were coming to Halifax. I said, I should dig out some memorabilia because they'd like to probably see it. So, and believe it or not, we had a rented storage unit, and I opened up the storage unit, and the very first tote right on top, and believe me, there was a lot of totes. We moved a 5,000 square foot home. The tote on top, I opened it up, and there's a newspaper article where my mom was being interviewed, and right in it, she said, in the newspaper article, she said, we're lucky enough to get the stick that scored, Paul Henderson's stick that scored the winning goal, nicely autographed to our two boys. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it now.
That's a pretty good Christmas present.
It was awesome. You know, as an 11-year-old, all you want to do is go to Schaefer Pen parking lot. It was nice and flat with the ball hockey. But,
We'll finish the story with Bob. Bob, you came back, after the series, you flew into Montreal. Maybe tell us a little bit about the celebration with the players and you getting back to Newfoundland.
Yeah, that's another interesting time in my life. We left Prague, flew to London, refueled there, and then London to Toronto was the original plan. Then they decided they'd stop in Montreal to let the Canadian players off, Savard, Tumahoviches, Cornwallis, and Dryden, and the newspaper people, Red Fisher and others, and myself. And I'd stay at the hotel at the airport like that night and fly home in the morning. So we were told then, as we neared Montreal, we were told that the Prime Minister was going to be there at the airport in Dorval, and there was going to be a big crowd, big celebration to welcome the team. So everybody was going to have to get off the airplane and partake in the celebration and welcome home to Canada. So all of the country was really zeroed in on this big exhibition series we just had, which was won by Canada. And it was coast to coast, no question. Now, there was an election on at the time, and Mr. Trudeau was on the hustings, as they say. And when we arrived in Montreal, we got off the airplane. My big deal was to get through this massive crowd. There were tens of thousands out there. Fire trucks. It was really, and the tarmac was just completely filled, and all around the airport. As far as you could see were people cheering, calling Canada, and so on. I have to get through this and get across, out, and to the hotel. We had red jackets with the maple leaf and CBC on the lapel there, and lapel pocket, and some guy called me and said, "You're Bob Cole?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "You know all the players?" And I said, "Yeah, well, I think I'd better. I've been with them for a month." So he said, "Well, we need somebody to introduce the players to the Prime Minister." What do you mean? And he said, "Well, two Mounties took me, and we went through the crowd and got up front near the airplane." Now, the guys were having a nice time coming over on the charter, you can imagine. And so certain things happened. We won't get into that, but some people were disheveled a little bit probably, and they had to get kind of presentable for the Prime Minister. So it was quite a time. So the Prime Minister and I had some time to talk about the series. And he did mention listening to radio. He didn't have time to watch the television every day. And he was nice with his comments about the coverage we gave. And he knew I was from Newfoundland, of course, because of that. And the guy who stopped me, his name was Vic, and I think it was Chapman. It was the Prime Minister's traveling secretary. So he was there somewhere, standing close by. And Mr. Trudeau said, "Bob, when are you going home? I'm going back home." And I said, "Tomorrow morning. I Can't wait. Been gone for a while. And he said, no, you're not going home tomorrow morning. And I said, oh? And he said, no, you're not. Vic, he said, Vic, get Bob's bags and put them on the airplane over there. He had a charter there waiting to take him to Newfoundland on the election trail. And he said, you're coming home with me. Well, I said, thank you. So I flew home with the Prime Minister, and it was kind of a neat way to end that little trip I had. So I was pretty lucky through it all.
What a way to wrap up the series.
Yeah.
Well, very good. Well, I think that concludes the speakers panel portion. I just wanted to, is there a couple questions that people might have for our panel before we head down to watch the third period? Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, probably. I would not disagree with that. Our guys were getting better and better, and Harry Sinden and John Ferguson, the coaching staff, they had changes made throughout, and things were gelling pretty good, I believe. But it was still very close, and that Soviet team was a darn good hockey team. They had a great goalie. The team was good, and well, you saw it all. It was, I wouldn't bet a plug nickel either way, I don't think. But I think we had the better team when it got through, and our guys got in a bit better shape.
Anyone else?
No overtime. As a matter of fact, if we didn't win the game, the Soviets would have been perceived to have won the series on goals for against, you know what I mean? They had the differential by just one, yeah. So Henderson's goal seized the moment and won the series. I'm having a tough time getting the question. Yeah, Gay Vermont left, and I'm sorry?
Did it bring the team together with the departures?
I'm not sure if it helped to bring the rest of the team together, but you know, it was tough going over there. It was a new kind of existence. I remember sitting down in the lobby of the Intourist Hotel one day with Guy Lapointe, who didn't leave, but he was sitting there, and I sat down next to him in the afternoon, just passing the time of day, and he had his head down between his knees, and he was shaking his head. And I said, "What's the matter, Guy?" And he said, "I knew I shouldn't have come over here. I knew it." So he didn't enjoy. He was here as a junior, he told me, some years before, and knew he wouldn't enjoy this. So it wasn't an easy time, you know. I understand that they had stakes that were sent over for the team, and some were taken and disappeared, and you know, so it wasn't a normal living. They weren't quite used to traveling like that, let me tell you. They go to five-star hotels, as you know, in their world of hockey. So it was tough. And anyway, to answer your question, I'm not sure if that helped everybody else pull together even more. It might have helped a little bit, but they were coming along awfully strong ever since Sweden. They got better and better.
One question here. Yep.
Yes, I did. I went in before the dressing room for the Soviets is right across. It's a huge hallway, almost as wide as this room, and the Canadian dressing room was over that corner, and there were Army people everywhere over there in the arena, and I had to go by them, and of course they yet can't move, can't go by there, and some guy standing near the dressing room door would see me and come out and tell them yes, so I'd be allowed to come in. And Mr. Bobrov would come over. He didn't speak English very well, and of course I didn't speak the Soviet language. But I had my lineup prepared for tonight's game from the previous game, and I'd show him, and he'd smile. He was a lovely person, I must say. He'd smile, and he'd look at the lineup that I had done, and I'd put my finger on Luchenko, and he'd say, da, which was yes, and so, okay. And then I'd point to Petrov, and he'd say, da, and I'd point to Anderson, and he'd say, niet. So I was crossing names off when he told me to cross them off. And then he added, I had the spares there, and he'd add the person that's going in. So that's what I mentioned when Foster was seeking me out before every game to get the lineup for tonight. Somebody get Bob. I've got to have Bob. And his glasses were going around like this. And so I felt pretty good about that. And it just turned out, it happened because I was the first one, I think, to arrive on Wednesday in Montreal, and they didn't know a clue who I was. They didn't have a clue. But all of a sudden, I was perceived to be the Ozerov to them, I think. And Mr. Bobrov said he could come in and get his lineup before the game. It was tremendous. It was great.
One last question, this gentleman.
I think any official that reaches that level has to have a discipline within themselves that, like Bob said about when asked about, how did he anticipate the game to go and how did he react to it? He said, I just go as it flows. So you divorce a lot of your potential preconceived notions and let it flow. Assume it's just a regular game and you're just going through the motions and you just react to what occurs and you can't anticipate or over anticipate. Sean had asked me about something about philosophy of refereeing and having kind of like your question. You can't referee the cause. I'm a North American, Canadian's a North American. It's the Cold War or whatever. I could identify with the Canadian side of it versus the Russian side of it, but I can't be involved in weighing it this way or that way. You just have to, like Bob says, just call it as it comes. You can't anticipate what's going to happen.
Great, thanks. Before we close, I just want to thank a couple people in the audience. Paul Patskow for supplying the audio clips today. Thank you, Paul. And additionally, my co-author in the book, Jim Prime, who's here from Nova Scotia and did a wonderful job, and I really enjoyed working with him throughout the project. So Jim, you did a wonderful job. And so now we're going to have a little break, and then we'll head downstairs and watch the third period of the final game. And, I think hopefully some of these stories will bring new memories to you that you can share with others, and it'll give you a new perception of a future anniversary. So it's going to be very enjoyable, and thanks for being here again tonight.
Sean, I just, on behalf of the 3,000, thank you for organizing the book, for organizing this event, and it's a real honor for me to be here tonight in this space.